Well, to say the least, this has been a strange Idaho winter. I think most of you can resonate with that to some degree. We are used to more snow, colder temperatures, and more icy roads, but we haven't really gotten that this year. Winter for me has always usually meant things get a little bit harder. I grew up taking care of animals, and winter means you got to make sure that animals are taken care of. You got to make sure that they have water, they have enough food. But even if you have never raised animals, preparation for winter means you have extra work to do. You have to blow out your sprinklers. You have to make sure your houses and your RVs are ready for the normal colder temperatures, that is. But there's also fun parts of winter, usually. We get to go sledding with the kids. Some of you enjoy skiing and snowboarding. But eventually in winter, we start thinking about the dangerous things. Man, the roads are icy. I've got that parent, that grandparent that I'm kind of concerned about. I know it might not be the best time of year. And at this point, where we are now in February, we're usually ready for winter to be over, whether or not it's been a true Idaho winter or not. And we're ready for spring. We're ready for the warmer temperatures, the rain. We're ready to see the animals come out. We're ready for the grass and plants to start thriving. And in the middle of spring, there's something that happens, and all of a sudden, we're ready for summer. And we're ready to go hit the lakes. We're ready for school to be out and picnics, and it's going to be amazing. There's going to be vacations. And then we get sunburnt. And then the triple digits start hitting, and we do anything we can to stay inside. And sometime in the end of July to August, we are begging for fall to start. We're ready for the pumpkin patches, the fun pictures with the kids and grandkids, the sweaters, the hot chocolate, the soup weather. And I personally love fall for all the hunting seasons that open. There's a few of you I know that agree with that. But sometime in the middle of fall, we wake up and go, I need to blow out my sprinklers. And it's getting colder, and the roads might start getting icy. And wait, haven't I said this part of the sermon already? Time. Time will always keep moving. It's something that humans simply cannot control. We do our best to control time, and sometimes in kind of silly ways. Throughout the winter, we do anything we can to keep our houses warm, to keep our cars warm. During the summer, we pray that our air conditioning doesn't go out on our cars. We do everything we can, even though we might not put it that way. As humans, we almost naturally try to alter the times that we are living in. We try to make the times that we are living in the most desirable times possible. I know some people that when it's too cold to plant outside, they get small seedlings and then they start their backyard gardens in their house, sometimes in the kitchen, the dining rooms, and they get their lights out and they're starting these little seedling plants that would otherwise die outside. We wouldn't call that altering time, but in a way that's what they're doing. I think as humans, we sometimes try to alter time. And sometimes we wish that we could just press pause. That we could just live in the same 3 months over and over again. Like I said, some of the outdoorsmen, anglers, you campers, from summer to about the end of November, those are amazing months to get out and enjoy God's creation. Some of you, though, when it comes to timing, you're controlled by 3-letter acronyms, and you would never admit it. The NBA, the MLB, the MLS, and today predominantly the NFL. Our Sunday schedule has been affected today. Time is something that we try to control. Often, and I'd say understandably, I've heard parents of older kids tell expecting or younger parents, cherish every moment you get before you know they're going to grow up. It's going to be over in a blink of an eye. And those young parents, they know it, but before they know it, the newborn stage is over. And now the kid is walking, and what the first day of school just happened? Wait, prom just happened? They're graduating high school now? And before those young parents know it, they're the middle-aged parents telling the expecting parents, treasure every moment you have. Cherish time. It's going to be gone before you realize it. Time always keeps moving. It's something that we can't control. No matter how much the farmer, the hunter, the athlete wishes they could control time, we simply can't. Time always marches on. Our text, Ecclesiastes 3, will reveal to us there is a time for every matter. The likely author of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, wrote on many topics. He wrote on the vanity of life, wisdom for the young and the old. And today we're going to read what he calls himself, the preacher is what he calls himself throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, what Solomon the preacher, the assembler of the people, what he wrote about time. And how we, as followers of God, ought to treat and understand it, and really how we should view the passing of time. These verses, even though they come in the end of the book, they really summarize the book well. Ecclesiastes 12:1. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure. And then in Ecclesiastes 12:13, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. If Solomon, the man that got to experience so much, could tell us one thing, he would say life without God is life without purpose. This morning, the preacher opens our text in Ecclesiastes 3 with a poem. If you would read along with me, if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 15. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1 says this, For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. There is a time for every matter. And the author, the preacher Solomon, he's not using this poem as a way to help us kind of identify every single experience that someone can have. He's not saying every experience is summed up here, but what he's trying to do is just sum up life in these verses. Obviously, we do and experience things outside of what he's mentioned in these first 8 verses, but he's telling the people he's writing to and telling us what I'm about to talk about is in the scope of the totality of human existence. And personally, when I think about time, I really want to control it. I wish that I could just wake up, that I could open my bedside drawer and have this remote that just says time on the top. And I could press pause, I could press play, I could rewind, fast forward. There are some days I would just like to hit next scene. I don't want to live through this again. But there are days with sick loved ones that I would love to press pause on. And I would love to sit there for a few extra hours. Like I said, there are other days, though, that if I could, I would just hit rewind and then I would just hit skip. Let's never experience that again. Time is something that we like to control. And maybe you've felt yourself or you've heard yourself asking that question, God, would you just give me a few more days with them? God, I haven't gotten to say everything that I need to say with them. Maybe you've prayed the prayer, God, would you simply let this nightmare end? I'm ready to move on. I've learned whatever you want to teach me, God, just can you make this stop? And our preacher, the author of Ecclesiastes 3, would tell us there is a time for every matter. These times, they're not prescriptive as much as they are descriptive. They're the general terms that sum up what we call life. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this poem, but I do want to talk about a few of the lines. A time to be born, and a time to die. This verse, even though Solomon didn't know it, would give hope to Christians. We know that death is not the end. Jesus has asked all Christians to die twice. You would die to yourself so that your second death isn't really death. That first death is actually a promise of hope. There's a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. There's a time that you need to do work. And then there's a time that you get to enjoy the fruit of your labor. You get to enjoy your work. And there's a time to break down and a time to build up. And it feels like the Highway Department of Idaho is always in a time of breaking down. It genuinely, it seems like there's always more roads being closed than there ever are roads being opened. But the next verse is a little more of a different kind of breaking. A time to weep and a time to mourn, a time to laugh and dance. The times of weeping and mourning are often times that we really wish we could just press skip. I'm ready to close my eyes and I'm just going to press skip and I'm going to wake up and it's all going to be over. And yet, I don't want to make light of those times, but yet, those times of weeping and mourning, they can tell us that we got to experience something so good that it's worth weeping over. Not always. Sometimes times of weeping and mourning are simply times of heartbreak, and that's okay. But sometimes, the times of weeping and mourning, they remind us how good some of the things we've gotten to experience in life are. They remind us of the good that might be to come. But I know I've lived it. I've experienced that moment of losing a family member. And I don't deal with grief well, but I remember I've lost family members and I've thought, they had an amazing life and I'm so glad I got to be a part of it. The grief is 100% real. But knowing that I got to live life with that person is also real. And knowing that as believers, there is hope beyond the current grief. That there's hope beyond the second death because of the first death. The first death of believers is a guarantee that the second death won't be their end. When I think of times of weeping and mourning, I think of one of the great heroes of the Bible, Queen Esther. As a young orphan, she was kidnapped by a lust-filled, power-hungry, evil king, and she was treated as one of his many wives. She was taken from the little family she had left. She was at the will of an ungodly man, and one day, you might know the story, but her cousin Mordecai walked up to her. Now that she is queen, she's experiencing a terrible life, but she's queen. And Mordecai walks up to her and says, "Cousin Esther, what if God has made you queen for such a time as this?" And in the middle of what I have to know were genuine tears of heartbreak, as Esther was one of hundreds of women that this king called his wives. One of hundreds of women that shared intimacy with this evil king. Those tears were genuine tears, but Queen Esther got to experience saving a nation of people from genocide. Times of weeping and mourning and times of laughter and dance. She got to experience genuine joy from saving these people. That doesn't necessarily mean her situation was better. The heartbreak, the brokenness that she experienced, they were genuine, that they were real. The next part of the poem, a time to gather stones and a time to cast away, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, it actually is one of the vague parts of this poem. There are a few vague parts that you could look up, all different kinds of scholarly opinions, and guys would have so many opinions, but some of the best scholars that I've read that talk about this verse, they simply say, what if the text is trying to tell us something by the inherent vagueness found therein? I think that the genuine idea comes out to something like doing well and building up. There's a time of doing well, building up. There's a time of separation and lack, but I wonder if some of the vagueness shouldn't tell us something about time. That's one of the worst parts of time, is how vague it is. We've never woken up before and gotten a letter in the mail that says, this is everything you're going to experience today. You wake up and you live your life. And what happens, happens. Verse 6, it continues the vagueness. A time to seek and lose, a time to keep and cast away. And I think you can fill in what you seek for and what is lost. Sometimes we seek for friendship. Sometimes we lose community. But I think what we need to realize in the midst of whatever we seek, in the midst of whatever we lose, God is still trustworthy in those times. And finally, I want to talk about the last part of the poem, a time to love and a time to hate. There is a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, but I want to spend more time in verse 8. A time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. This verse is not a free pass to say that when you're feeling like loving people, you just got to say, oh, this is a time for loving people, and when you're ready to hate someone, is oh, this is a time for hate. The author's not saying, okay, you just get this free pass so you get to wave around and say, well, Ecclesiastes 3:8 said this, and I heard it on a Sunday sermon. That's not what the author's telling us. He's saying there are going to be times in your life that you experience some of the most extreme emotions that you will ever experience. That is part of the human existence. And this poem as a whole, it is not 12 steps to the great Ecclesiastes life that, well, I'm going to break down my entire life into every little season and time that Ecclesiastes 3 talks about. That's not the point of Ecclesiastes 3. The point of Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8 is that we will all act, we will live, and yet time marches on under the control of God. All of this time talk, it makes me think about a phrase that we use a lot, and if you're a native Idahoan, you probably use it more increasingly these days, and not always in the best way, but it's the phrase, the good old days. Man, I miss the good old days. I wish that we would just be back in the good old days, and I've heard it put before. What if you are in your good old days and you just aren't realizing it? You're so uncontent. You're grasping for time so much that you fail to look around and look at your life and go, man, God has given me some amazing things. And sometimes the times of weeping and mourning, they put these blinders on us. And all we can see is the immediate grief in front of us. And God said, would you just take the blinders off and know that yes, the grief is real, but there is so much good in your life also. Time marches on under the control of God. I think that we are called to cherish the life that God has given us. And I don't just mean our individual life. I mean the whole experience of life that we get to live. The staying up late with crying kids. I just need a glass of water, I'm really thirsty. Those moments as parents might be times that we need to cherish instead of just rolling our eyes and going, again? Maybe it's God, thank you so much that I got to have this child. There's times as grandparents where hopefully you get to look around and you get to see some of the seeds that you sowed. That you get to see what God's done with your work. We're not perfect. I know that as grandkids, it's easy to view grandparents, and parents for that matter, but grandparents as this perfect saint. There's no perfect grandparents, but there are grandparents that have worked extremely hard to give their family a better life than they had. We might need to look around and say, God, thank you for this kind of a grandparent. There are hard days at work that might just make you want to go home. And I think if we could maybe put it in a way that we might understand it a little better, there's times that we wish we could just close our eyes and hop in a DeLorean with Marty and Doc and go to wherever we want to go. We wish that we could just click our heels 3 times and say, I want to go home. Time simply doesn't work that way. But I think that regardless of whatever time that we are experiencing, God has said, what if you cherish it? Verses 9 through 15, it's the last part of this text that we're going to read today, but it's what the author kind of writes in reflection of his own poem. He says, I've thought about, I've experienced all of this time. What do I actually need to say about it? That's what he writes in verse 9 through 15. If you'd read that with me. He says, what gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart. Yet, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all this toil. That is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. I think the question that he might be rhetorically asking himself is, what is the purpose of all this? The author of Ecclesiastes, he kind of asks himself that in multiple times in one way or another throughout the book. And his answer to his own question, it starts with this idea of a stamp of eternity. That all this time that we have been given is something that we actually ought to cherish. The answer to the question, what is the purpose of life, starts with a characteristic that every single one of us has. Whether you follow Jesus or not, you were made in his image. Let that sink in. And maybe let it sink in that every person that you struggle with, they are made in God's image as well, whether or not they follow Jesus. There is not a single human alive. There has not ever been a single human that has lived that was not made in the image of God. Though not every one of those image bearers follows the God that they were made in the image of. The preacher writes about the stamp of eternity that we have as image bearers of God. And it's that stamp that I think, almost without words, breaks our heart when we feel the passing of a loved one. Even if they're a follower of Jesus, there's something in us that goes, this isn't right. And I think it might be part of this stamp of eternity, that something inside of us that no scientist is ever going to be able to analyze, something inside of us says death wasn't supposed to happen this way. But as believers, this eternity stamped on our heart, it doesn't have to just be a heartbreak. It can be a promise of hope. God's called us to follow him now, but we look forward to a promise of hope later. The author, the preacher as he calls himself, maybe he would just say, time is God's gift to you. It's not something that you should actually be afraid of. Eternity on our hearts, it will always have us almost wanting control of time because we know what can be in a way. Whether or not if you know all the intricate theology and all the big words about eschatology and the end of time and da-da-da-da-da, there's something inside of us that says that this isn't it. And I think it might be that stamp of eternity. The preacher encourages, take pleasure in your work. Take pleasure in the time that God has given you. It is a gift. Now, you might not love every moment of your life the way a 7-year-old anticipates every Christmas morning. If you wake up that way every day, I might need you to tell me how you feel that way. But I don't think we will. I don't think we will always wake up with the anticipatory excitement of a 7-year-old on Christmas. But I do think that God has given us a gift. Regardless of your age, regardless of where you're at in life right now, God has said, here is life. Live it. It's a life that operates in time that he controls. In the darkest points of my life, where sometimes it genuinely felt like that phrase from Psalm 23, that there is a dark valley, there is a shadow of death. Points of my life where sometimes getting out of bed was the greatest victory. When I was in a time where I wished so badly I could just grab that remote and hit skip, skip, skip. I have to remember, in those times, the Good Shepherd is still walking with me. He never walked away with me, and I know that I don't understand all the ways of God. I really wish I could sometimes. And while I don't understand all of His ways, I know that He sees all of mine. Every time, every season I'm in, He's telling me, Connor, this life I've given you, it's for you to live. Canyon Springs, this life God has given you is for you to live. The Good Shepherd has never left us. So instead of maybe wanting to relive the day with Bill Murray and Punxsutawney Phil, maybe instead of grabbing the remote of life and trying to fast forward, maybe if Solomon could say, go read one other part of the Bible, maybe he would say, go read James 4. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town, and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live, and do this or that. I think regardless of the time that you're in, if it's a time of weeping and death and mourning, or if it's a time of birth and laughter and excitement, I think regardless of what time you're in, you need to know that the Good Shepherd walks in both with you. That the Good Shepherd won't leave you in the middle of either of those. I'm going to encourage you, if you could, to take the remote and set it down. Don't pick it back up. I don't know what you're going to experience in 2026. I'm hopeful that there is some joy. But there might be some sadness also. Whatever it is that you experience in 2026, I'm just going to ask you that, and I think it's a similar request that Solomon would make you, would just say, put the remote down. Loosen your grip. Take a breath. And cherish the life God has given you. He's always going to be with you in it. God, this morning, we ask that you help us as your followers, God, as people that do love you, God, and that you would help us trust you. God, that you would help us cherish the time that you've given us, God. It's going to be hard sometimes, God. It's not going to be a victory every single day. But every single day, you still walk with us, God. God, those of us that might not follow you, I'd ask that this would be an encouragement to the character of you. God, the love that you have, that description of Good Shepherd is so apt, God. It's such a correct example of the kind of love that you have for us, God. Whether or not we follow you, God, you have chosen to love us. God, help us cherish the time that you've given us and simply not waste it because there's going to be another tomorrow, God. That's not a guarantee. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.